host was coming home one night, and he got, all of a sudden there's a sudden storm, and he was lost in the storm completely. Had complete vertigo. He couldn't figure out which way was up and which way was down, and he was completely lost. While he was struggling and figuring out what to do, he saw these kind of like laser eyes. So this is a 19th century account, right? He saw these laser eyes, and perhaps this can connect to the current UFO stuff too. I don't know. This is but and I can send you the reference later if you're interested. Yes, so he saw these sort of laser eyes in the dark, and he described it as like Le Mineur, the leader of the wolves, right? No, it was two guys. It was two guys, both with laser eyes, these sort of wolf leaders, and they approached him, and they put him back in the right direction. So these were werewolves that actually were like helped him get back to where he needed to go. And it's the kind of thing. And then when he got to the road, he turned around and they disappeared. They were gone.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we're joined by Dr. Andrew Mans, who is a historian and the creator behind The Thinker's Garden, a blog specialising in overlooked history. As an editor, he has written and published a variety of historiettes on little-known Bohemians, occultists, and mystics such as the Los Angeles Noah, Reverend J.E. Lewis, Lady Walburga Paget, and Baron Seymour Kirkup. Today, he takes us through his research into the little-known folklore and occult history of Auvergne, a little-known historic province in central France, which he has dubbed the Transylvania of France. In a show featuring werewolves, vampires, the undead, Dr. Mans takes us through the rich and varied folkloric history of this little-known region. In the Plus show, we get into the legends of Lake Pavin, the storm-raising lake, and we discuss an interesting angle on the lost children plane crash from the Colombia story from earlier in the year. And Andrew tells us about the unique healing tradition of the Guerisseurs. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, it's absolutely fascinating. Andrew wraps up with an interesting note on the belief in the area that fairies can be seen at a certain high altitude. Really interesting stuff, and a lot of this won't be heard before, as it's originally in Occitan, the original language of that area, the original dialect. So it's good stuff. It's good stuff. I think you're going to like it. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, it's simple to do so. Simply click on the Patreon link at the bottom of the show notes, and you can get everything, including the backlog of all the Plus shows and a host of literally dozens of bonus shows. Okay, let's get on with the show. Okay, Dr. Andrew Mans, it's very nice to have you on the Spirit Box. You're most welcome. Now, you have been here before, but under an alias. Yes. So it's nice to welcome you to the show. So would you tell the good people a little bit about yourself and about your areas of expertise?
Yeah, so I am a cultural historian. I study at the Warburg Institute. I graduated there in 2019. And I worked for a few years in geopolitics and in PR. And I recently resigned. Well, I resigned a few months ago from my position, and I just wanted to start working on a lot of things that I've been thinking about for a long time, like esotericism, and to basically just to try to put out my my ideas in a more organized context, so we're a more organized format. So I'm working on a few books now, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed to see if any publishers will be interested in any of my ideas. But I've also launched a company called Visit Auvergne, which is a tourism company, and it focuses on Auvergne, which is in central France, and it is a region that is not it's not really well known outside of France, and even in France, it's called France Profonde, which means deep France. And I have in some of my writings, I've described elements of Auvergne's culture as resembling that of, in terms of the romanticism. I like to describe Auvergne as the Transylvania of France, in that it's really, you've got all these forests, you've got all these mountains, you've got all of this folklore, a lot of fascinating stories, many of which have not been told, are still in the original French, and many Anglophone people are not aware of these sort of ghost stories, werewolf stories, even vampire stories. And so, what I'm trying to do, probably, and I've certainly been inspired by another folklorist who I've written about, and I'm sure you've heard of, Darren, and he is Charles Godfrey Leland. So sort of towards the end of his life, Leland took up. He bought a no, he didn't buy. He and his wife stayed in Florence, and he basically died in Florence. But while he was in Florence, that's when he stumbled upon, or he said he stumbled upon, this sort of body of information, folklore about witches and things of this nature. And he spent a lot of time with the people that he's living around. And so I'm kind of inspired by that as well, because I'm trying to learn Occitan, which is the kind of so prior to the France becoming centralized, you had a whole bunch, even to this day, I mean, it's not as common, but you had a whole bunch of there were regional variations in dialects, but also people were mostly speaking Occitan in these, particularly where I'm at, which is sort of, we could call it South Central. There was really this, what we call the Auvergnat Occitan, and a lot of oral literature, strong oral traditions. But so yes, this is essentially what I'm focusing on now, and I'm trying to do many things at once, and I am hoping that one of the things, if not all of them, will succeed, but only time will tell.
Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have you back on the show, and I must say that Transylvania of France is very promising for the show, definitely, and I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing some of these tales. I'm just trying to remember from like my high school geography. Is that Massif Central?
It is.
Look at that. Remember, got a B1 in higher geography. So
Yeah,
there we go.
it's the Massif Central. It's a so we know from history, the World War II in France, the Vichy regime. So Vichy is part of, that's Allier, which is one of the departments of Auvergne. So technically now Auvergne no longer exists as an administrative region. So now it's the Auvergne Rhône-Alpes. And that's relatively recent. A few years ago, they kind of made this. They combined the different regions, but in Visit Auvergne, I tried to kind of stick to the historic definition of Auvergne, which is really these 4 departments, which include Allier, Haute-Loire, Cantal, and Puy-de-Dôme, which is where I currently reside.
Cool. So, you mentioned werewolves. I know from memory there's a really famous French werewolf story. Oh God, I can't remember anything. My memory is so bad, it's ridiculous. But there was a French movie in the 90s that was kind of like a weird 1700s martial arts movie about a beast in somewhere in central France. Am I anywhere near, or does that sound remotely like the area, or am I just rambling?
You're absolutely correct. So that's actually one of the main, that story. So what you're referencing the Beast of Gévaudan.
That's it. Yeah.
which was a real event that happened over several years in the 18th century in the area of what is now, well, between what is now Gévaudan and areas of the what we call the Marguerite, which is a very kind of remote forested area, sort of on the southern tip of, so it's on the southern tip of Auvergne. So it's bordering between Haute-Loire and I believe it's Corrèze or Cruz. I'm perhaps I'm mixing up my geography, but yes, it did involve parts of Auvergne, and well, it's a mystery that, you know, frankly, to be frank, it's really unsolved to this day. I mean, it's essentially what happened is you had a series of slayings, killings of happening in the countryside, with young children being killed and other things like that, and it became a huge phenomenon. And in fact, it was a big media phenomenon as well. It was there's actually an academic book which came out a few years ago, which kind of details everything. And the name is slipping me now, but it really details the media element of it. The fact that this was a tale that was really receiving a lot of publicity and international recognition. And in that regard, it really changed the way people were thinking about parts of France and the wolves and things of that nature. But the Beast of Gévaudan, it was obviously, it was a big story for its time, but there was always a huge, for, I mean, until relatively recently, maybe the last 150 years, there was a huge wolf problem. Well, there was, perhaps I should not say problem, but there were many wolves in Auvergne, and these wolves would have, you know, really go into villages and stalk towns, and you'd have stories coming out. I mean, you could see on my website stories in the newspaper coming out where, you know, entire towns where people were attacked, and it really became an issue, particularly in Auvergne, because it's quite remote. It's in the mountains, lots of snow for 5, 6 months, 7 months even. And so all of this helped to, in my view, and I think others would agree, to create this, to give Auvergne for many years this reputation as being a place where you would not, one should not readily trespass. You know, it's a place where you're not sure that you will, if you go there, you will survive certain elements of it. So, but yes, the Beast of Gévaudan is a real, it's a real story, and it had a huge influence on the way in which we think about werewolves and wolves and even serial killers as well.
And so, in terms of the kind of the werewolf lore of the area, can you treat us to some?
Yeah, so we have the Beast of Gévaudan, which is in the 18th century. Prior to that, we have many other stories. Probably the most famous one derives from so there's a story which comes out of a Renaissance writer. I think it was maybe I think it was Henri Boguet, who's the origin of this, who is the one who recorded the tale first, and then it sort of duplicated throughout over the centuries, going way up to the 19th century. But it's a tale which says that in 1588 there was essentially in a town in Cantal, which is one of the departments of Auvergne. It's quite, well, it's remote now. At that time, it was really remote. Lots of mountains, lots of forests, lots of sort of river rapids and things of that nature, and, you know, a population that was also under the thumb of these different what they call the seigneurs. So these lords of the manor, these guys who were aristocrats, but they were very wild. A lot of them had, and I will be writing about a lot of this in the next few, probably over the next few weeks to months, but almost like gang leaders who would really like gang leaders who were like up and kind of they'd have their guys in the castle and they would go around, and it's almost like Game of Thrones kind of stuff, and it's all real, and they they were eventually persecuted for various things. But anyway, back to back to the werewolf story. So 1588, there was apparently, so the story goes that there was a nobleman who apparently he passed. So there was, I can start from the beginning. There was a hunter who was out and he saw a giant wolf, and this wolf attacked him, and he sliced off, when he was defending himself, he sliced off the paw of this wolf. And he just took the paw as like a trophy, right? So then when he was like on his way back from his hunt, he passed by the home of this nobleman, and he said, "Oh man, I was just attacked by this wolf and blah blah blah, and like, look, here's the paw, and it was crazy, da da da." Oh wow, that's fascinating, damn. And yeah, that was, that's just me. um, but so yeah, so then the nobleman realizes, so he goes back into his house and he realizes that, like, I think he goes into his kitchen or something, and then he sees his wife standing by the door, and she has like a part of her hand is cut off. And so he makes the assumption that she was actually the wolf that had been out there prowling, and she had transformed. Anyway, the story sort of zooms towards the end and says, this woman was killed at this, was taken to, was imprisoned and then burned at the stake. And so this is one of the most famous, uh, certainly in general, one of the most famous werewolf stories. It's well known. It's been repeated in many different um, in books, and so that sort of starts there. And then you have, in just generally in the 19th century and even in the 18th century, you have lots of um, sort of, I wouldn't call them folklorists, but I guess historians who are in Auvergne, and they are around Auvergnat people, and they're saying, well, this is the typical folklore. This is what they speak about in the mountains. And the unifying thing is always they have werewolf, um, they have sort of werewolf stories about something called the Meneur, if I'm pronouncing correctly, le Meneur de Loup, which is the wolf pack leader, the leader of the wolves. Which is almost like, is a weird kind of figure, because he's sort of a werewolf, but he also has the power to like control other wolves. And sometimes in some stories, he's actually like a logical figure, like a rational thinking figure, and saying, I'm working for Satan, and I'm going to bring these souls to Satan, and blah 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 blah. But you find this around, particularly in Cantal, you find lots of these stories. So that's what fascinates me, and I think I've seen maybe I've only seen perhaps 30% of the stuff that's there, because I'm still digging through a lot of the French, these different documents that have really been overlooked. But I'm quite sure that there are, to this day, um, oral oral accounts of different things, and oral stories that have yet to be, in Occitan or in other languages, that have yet to be written down. So yes, I do think that there is really this huge werewolf element to Auvergnat folklore.
And are there any, like, well, you just mentioned that kind of the Lord of the Wolves. It was an interesting piece which I haven't heard before. Um, yeah, are there any kind of like very regionally specific things that are kind of notably different?
I think so. One of the things that I recently wrote about on visitauvergne.org, which is probably the first, and again, I'm not a my PhD is in, it's in Renaissance history, but it's in propaganda, so it's in the sort of the study specifically focusing on 17th century English sort of civil war era politics and pamphleteering. So I could be wrong when I say this, but my understanding is that this, in my experience, what I've come across, it seems to be the first account of a good werewolf. So it's a document which is coming out of the 19th century, and it's actually a statistician who basically was staying in Auvergne, and he said that the person who hosted him said that he was like there had this another thing I should mention about Auvergne is that the weather is quite variable, and sometimes you can have hailstorms and things very like all in the same day. It's because we're up in the mountains, and things can be quite uh, mercurial. Anyway, so this guy was apparently the host was coming home one night, and he got all of a sudden there's a sudden storm, and he was lost in the storm completely. Had complete vertigo. He couldn't figure out which way was up and which way was down, and he was completely lost. While he was struggling and figuring out what to do, he saw these kind of like laser eyes. So this is a 19th century account, right? He saw these laser eyes, and perhaps this can connect to the current UFO stuff too. I don't know. This is but and I can send you the reference later if you're interested. Yes, so he saw these sort of laser eyes in the dark, and and he described it as like Lumineur, the leader of the wolves, right? No, it was two guys. It was two guys, both with laser eyes, these sort of wolf leaders, and they approached him, and they put him back in the right direction. So these were werewolves that actually were like helped him get back to where he needed to go. And it's the kind of thing. And then when he got to the road, he turned around and they disappeared. They were gone. So it's almost as like you also get this thing in American folklore too, where you get these, you get these passengers, like I don't know, you get a passenger who gets in your car and you're taking them somewhere, and then like, oh, and all of a sudden they're gone. So what's fascinating to me is like this, this is a document literally from like 1870 something, 1880 something, and you've got this tale here, and it's just so cool to me because as I said, it's for me, it's the first good werewolf tale that I've ever seen. And it almost goes against, like, I mean, obviously you could say, well, maybe the guys, but for me it was pretty cool. So I mean, I detailed the story in the article, which is it's on Auvergne, but I'm sure that I will find more or similar accounts, the deeper I go in this journey.
That's fascinating, and I totally get what you mean. Like they're like those kind of interceptor stories, where the journey's interrupted, and it's usually a hellish journey.
Yeah.
That's usually things go
Yeah.
south pretty badly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of happens. That's really interesting that it was just sent back the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. It was just like, I'm reading, I'm getting excited. I'm like, okay, you got these two guys show up with this sort of red glaring eyes. And then it's just like they're his companions on the journey. And it's like, okay, there's your house is right there. And then he turns around, oh, thanks, guys, and they're gone.
Amazing. That's hilarious.
Uh,
I'm really fascinated by kind of werewolves and kind of the idea of like shifting into wolves. Because it does have a lot of folkloric um, repetition across the world. It's really quite remarkable. As an author, Dusan Guerisseurs, I think he's like Croatian or Bosnian in origin, and he spent a lot of time in Haiti, and it was a whole raft of werewolf accounts, and kind of similarly, there would be like a werewolf clan, like it seemed to be kind of a group of magical practitioners, and their practice involved this type of shifting, and were then kind of like terrorizing towns. Really interesting. The same as screech owls. There was like a kind of a clan of witches that would shift into these screech owls. But they weren't taking anybody in the right direction home.
no,
Yeah, it was pretty catastrophic if you came across one of them.
yeah, it's this Haiti, element is fascinating to me. I was aware well, I am familiar with many elements of Haitian sort of religious and mystical practices, but the werewolf thing I'm not so familiar with. Um, I do know that in you also have a sort of similar entity. Well, you find these entities around the world, really, but to this day, in on Native American, so sort of sometimes on the reservation, in
Yeah.
reservations in the United States, many Native Americans will regularly, on a yearly basis, report um, interacting with entities that are the exact term slips me, but it is a kind of werewolf beast that sometimes, like for example, could have a guy who's driving on the road late at night, coming from movie theater,
Yeah.
have this beast running alongside his car, like looking in like this, and lots. In fact, I remember hearing about there was a police unit dedicated to studying these things in, I don't know if it was Nevada or it was again on the reservation, but it was an official police unit that was dedicated just to this investigation of these sort of paranormal accounts. Have
I
you
think
heard about this?
I think yeah. This says, is it Wendigo or
The
Skinwalker?
the beast or
The beast that they call like a Wendigo. Wendigo.
possibly the Wendigo. I think it was. I'm not sure if it was something about shape shifting, something.
Walker.
Skinwalker. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's what it was. But for sure, I know that there was that at a few years ago they did set up some kind of paranormal investigation unit within one of these reservations. So yeah, it's fascinating to me as well that there seems to be a universal element to this phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a parapsychologist, but I think yeah, there's certainly a lot of. It's like one of the things that I tend to do, and it was someone who actually gave me the idea a few years ago because she was doing it regularly. But often when meeting people, like the first things, like once you're sort of like getting in sort of relaxed state, almost like an icebreaker, you say like, "Do you have any ghost stories?" And you'd be surprised, like what people will say, because you could be like in this completely like very like like very stuffy context or something, and people go, "Oh yeah, yeah, actually this happened and da da da, and my aunt did this and so da da, and we were staying at this house once and da." So you just get this sense that there are people are having experiences like that there's never been a that this sort of the weirdness, the strange experiences, whatever, like it's never stopped. Like almost like the stuff that we experience in our dreams, or the stuff that we read in a fairy tale, or even in that we see in folklore. It often resembles a lot of what people sometimes experience. I mean, not everybody, but some people do. So
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of an edge to it for kind of moderns where we tend to perceive those experiences as earlier generations with our lack of sophistication, where, and there's also kind of a little bit in there which kind of insinuates that kind of our predecessors might have been a bit thick, and weren't quite capable of articulating or explaining what they saw on it. And I get that to a degree if you're talking about something like the Northern Lights or a certain kind of like celestial phenomenon. But exactly as you say, you ask people, and a high percentage will tell you about, yeah, one time I was walking home from whatever, saw this white lady walk across the road. It is a lot more common than people think. I think that one of the big issues that people have is, again, with modernity, like we don't have a kind of we don't have a language for that with any consensus.
That's a good point. Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, it's just very true. There's no. It's almost as if the tools that we have to. I mean, well, it's. I think and I discussed this with someone very close to me works in sort of Central Africa, and sometimes the work that she does, you get these sort of, so it involves a lot of sort of, there's a social element, there's an economic element, there's also an anthropological element, and sometimes the data that's coming out, you get different anecdotes and things coming out of the local people, and it's fascinating because I mean, I can just give you an example. Like there are stories about um, people I mean, these are contemporary stories. These are like
Mhm.
2015, 2016, 2017, about people transforming into elephants. And I was walking after this
Wow.
person, and they transformed into this element, and they started chasing us, and da, da, da. And it's like, but the tools. The thing is, like, it's very much there's a cultural sort of shift where I think people are more. You're raised in a culture in which you can. It sort of it fits into this system where people are readily happy to say, this is what happened, here's why it happened, and it's happened because we know that this is what the system is.
Hmm.
I think sometimes in the West it's very much like an experience happens, and we have this Cartesian approach where we
Yeah.
immediately there's a denial immediately there's a denial, because, like, well, it doesn't, what I've seen, what I've experienced doesn't fit within um the system that I've been raised in. It doesn't fit within this structure of laws or whatever, and so then immediately your brain is trying to kind of crush
Mm.
experiences. These, oh well, maybe I was just hallucinating, da, da, da. And so I think that's something that in my view, is tends to happen frequently in Western societies, where we're, we're frequently sort of pathologizing ourselves and each other.
Hmm.
Oh
Yeah.
well, he's just depressed, or he's this, or he's that, or he's blah 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 blah, and that's why he thinks this way. Now
Yeah.
he can go do this and other, and it's not. And obviously, we have we have psychiatry, and we have other things like this, but everyone is pathologizing the other person, and then sometimes when we're being overly analytical, I think, and subscribing to a particular system, we remove, like, we just exclude ourselves from from phenomena that actually could be of something that just doesn't fit within our current model.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Not
Uh,
to say it's all like, from the occultist perspective, we're always, as you're always wanting to kind of have a certain degree of skepticism and open-mindedness, and not to kind of immediately be dogmatic about anything.
mm, mm,
Want to analyze and to say, okay, well, what's the use? If I do this, what's going to happen?
yeah.
This sort of. But at the same time, you also understand that if a structure is not, sometimes certain structures do not allow one to access um, a wider sphere of data, or a wider sphere of experiences or
Mm,
phenomena.
yeah. Yeah. And like, interrogation is always good, and skepticism is a useful tool. But there is this idea, I think kind of a cultural idea, that we have kind of we've sorted it with the Cartesian model. That's it. It's done. everything's figured out. It's all wrapped up in that. And I mean, I would argue that it's not remotely, but that's by the by. But it it just puts these kind of existential blinkers on us, you
Mm.
know. And to your point, we end up doing kind of like mental acrobatics to kind of, you know, demystify mystical experiences, or, you know, or normalize. That's not the right way to say it. I was going to say normalize paranormal experiences. We
To kind of create like a standardized, to kind of
yeah,
like say, okay, well, it's like this. It's
mm,
only like this. And if
yeah,
it's not like this, then it's not, and it's a challenge because we as human beings, we love to, we love groups, right? We love to identify, we love to say I'm this or I'm that, or you're with me or he's not with me, or blah 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 blah.
yeah,
And always there's, you make this decision to join a particular structure, and then, or a particular, you know whatever it is, and sometimes you close yourself off to other experiences.
yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah, it is useful consideration, you know. And I think it I think it's helpful when you're looking at folklore to
Mm.
to think that way and not be like really regimented in a Cartesian worldview. Um, you know, because why do these things, you know, certain stories, folklores, why do they happen all over the world? You know, where you've got cultures who don't share any kind of link, historical links, talk about the same thing. Virtually every culture in the world talks about little people. You
Yeah,
know, you know. So
no, of course, it's I agree. And you're absolutely right. It's For me, it's one of the things that really, it it sort of pushes, it serves as an engine for everything that I do, because there's always a sense of mystery, of wonderment. There's always a sense of like, we don't have all the answers. Like, we don't have all like, it's gonna be like like, I don't have all the, like, we don't have all the answers. And that's great that we don't, because like, we're here, we've got, I don't know, maybe we've got one life, we've got many lives, who knows? But while we're here, let's enjoy, let's explore, this weird thing is, and I think with everything, it's also like the narrative, the story, the storytelling, like, the sharing of knowledge, going back to the time when all people were sitting around a fireplace and telling stories. And even in Auvergne, for example, one of the things that they would do late at night, in the winter months, is like, a lot of the families would come together to share the meal, and also to share the heat and things of this nature. And this is where you have people telling stories about fairies or werewolves, or bandits, and things of this nature. And of course, it happened in Auvergne. I'm sure it happened in many other places. And I think, yeah, overall, like, with the stuff that I do, it's always been about story. It's always been about narrative. Even when I was involved in geopolitics and PR, and everything is really about finding. There's always a necessity to find a way to communicate your ideas in a compelling way, sufficiently, and in doing so, you can actually move, uh, not just one person, not just two people, but many people, even nations sometimes. And this is it's a very powerful thing, and it comes back to this idea that we are storytelling animals, that we love stories, and that we cannot live without stories.
I like that. Yeah, gravitate to that a lot. I think story is absolutely vital to us. In pulling that thread a bit before we hit record, you mentioned there were some vampire tales.
Yes, So there's actually one of the oldest tales about a revenant or an undead person actually stems from something coming out of. So I don't know if you have heard of Gregory of Tours, who was a historian, who was a Gallo-Roman historian. So and he has a tale. I think it was in his. I believe it was in the History of the Franks. I think it was History of the Franks, but I could be mistaken. It could be one of his other books. But he has a tale about a senator from Clermont-Ferrand, which is the traditional capital of Auvergne. And this senator married a woman named Scholastica, and Scholastica was she was a noble woman, but she died before they could consummate the marriage, right? So it's kind of funny tale as well, because so they're at the funeral, and the senator is just like, he does this outburst in front of everybody. It's just like, Lord, I give her back to you just the way that I received her, which is basically to imply that, like, she was still a virgin, blah blah blah. They didn't. And so then at that point, she's lying there on the thing. She smiles, and then she like goes like this, and she's like, "Hey, you shouldn't talk about private stuff in front of everybody." Then she goes back to, she goes back to being dead. She's buried, and then he dies shortly thereafter, and for some reason he's buried in a separate grave. And this is all in the Latin. I'm just paraphrasing. This is all in the Latin from Gregory of Tours. So he's buried in a separate grave. And so apparently he, at night, rises from the dead, and he walks to her grave, and then he just rests beside her. And then Gregory of Tours says, to this day, they're both bodies are resting next to each other in the same grave, and it's called the Tomb of the Two Lovers. And so it's one of these things that is used to say that it's not really a vampire tale, but it is a kind of story of a revenant, of an undead. And it's, again, just like the werewolves, it's a good story. It's not like you have this evil vampire that's sucking somebody's blood. It's a story of, like, well, actually, yeah, he got up from his grave and he went to go lie by his wife. And but again, this is coming from a very elite historian who was coming from a prominent aristocratic and Catholic family. But yeah, so this is a sort of semi-vampire tale that's there. But you have other accounts of, I would say, some of the werewolf accounts also involve, there's a kind of combination between lycanthropy and also the sort of werewolves, because you do get accounts of entities that are lying on your chest and sort of sucking out your soul, and lots of the stuff that we see now in terms of the sleep paralysis stuff, and some of the stuff that I'm still unpacking. But for sure, there are vampire legends there. There's a term that is used, and I'm trying to remember the exact Occitan. I think it's Auvergne Occitan, so it's facilière, facilière, which are these women that are kind of like almost like witches, which fly around, right? And they again, they will lie on your chest, and they take babies, and it's again there's sort of vampiric elements there. But so I think the term, as I saw it, came from a French writer called Camille Odigier, I believe. Yes, I believe it's the facilier. I believe that's a correct term for it. It's a curious term, but that's the term that he uses, if I remember correctly.
And so, what did these women do? Like you're saying that they stole children. They were kind of a lot of illnesses attributed to them, that kind of stuff.
I wouldn't say illnesses. So Odigier speaks about them as flying around, almost like witches, taking children, meeting up at night and casting various spells. And it is possible that in his description, so he might have also been so I'm not sure if you've heard of, but another element of Auvergne folklore is this idea. I don't know, do you know the Puy de Dôme, the mountain, which I describe as the Olympus of France, so the Puy de Dôme is a volcano in France, in central France. It's not a dead volcano. It's what they call it. It's just dormant, but it is a volcano. And there used to be a temple of Mercury on the top of this volcano. Now, to this day, you can still see the ruins. And I live just 10 minutes from this volcano. And I would highly recommend, if you have a chance, I would highly recommend you go and see it, because it is pretty damn cool. But to connect the Puy de Dôme to the Facilière, so Odigier is talking about these kind of witches. And in the 16th century, you had a guy called Florimond. So Odigier, let me clarify, he was a 19th century historian. I think that a lot of what he was writing, particularly with these sort of witch-like vampiric beings, derive from earlier folklore, which is coming from this guy called, he was a magistrate, actually. His name was Florimond de Raymond, and he wrote a book which came out around it came out sort of 1600s. And in this book, he said that on the top of the Puy de Dôme, there were, and again, you can ask any witchcraft historian, but this is again one of the most popular accounts of the witches' Sabbath, that there were meetings on the top of the Puy de Dôme in the old ruins of. So the story goes that we do have archaeological evidence of this Temple of Mercury on the top of the Puy de Dôme. After many, many years, going to the Middle Ages, apparently there was a small chapel, Christian chapel, that was built there, that was there in the Renaissance era. So at the time, Florimond de Raymond said that at this chapel, at certain points in the night, on certain days, you would have witches meeting there, and meeting with like Satan himself, and there would be like a witches council, and they would talk about what spells they use on the world, and what spells they weren't going to use, and blah 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 blah. And this is all in I think the book is called L'Antichrist. And he put this all just to describe. He sort of talks about this woman who was there and who was initiated, and ultimately she was burned at the stake. And so he talks about like what she admitted to doing, and she sort of describes the whole sort of fantastical thing happening on the top of the Puy de Dôme. And it's quite fascinating to me because, for many years, obviously before the Christian era, this was a holy site. You had a Roman temple there, but mind you, before the Romans, you had Celtic. This was also a Celtic holy site. So the Romans conquered. So it was Julius Caesar who conquered this space, sort of around conquered Auvergne around 52, 55 BC, if I remember correctly. But prior to that, you had a vast Celtic, various tribes that were there. But the Puy de Dôme was holy. You had the Druids meeting there, and so on. So what's fascinating to me is that you get a continuity of this, these esoteric magical elements associated with this mountain. And even in the 20th century, I'm sure you've heard of the Raelians, right? The Raelians, the guys who, it's a sort of UFO religion. And the founder is a French guy. He claimed that his first experience with an alien, an extraterrestrial, happened not on the Puy de Dôme, but on one of the. So where I live, so there's multiple. It's just called the Mont Dôme. So there's many mountains which have this sort of strange, sort of conical appearance. But apparently, this founder of the Raelians, he was hiking one day on one of these. I think it was the Puy de la Sola. I'm not sure if it was Puy de la Sola or one of the Puy de something, one of these other ones, which is quite close to the Puy de Dôme, but again in the same region. And apparently, an alien came down and started speaking to him and giving him this gospel about this, that, and the other thing. For me, as someone who studies folklore and even as someone who loves anthropology, it's interesting that these mountains, this area, again, coming back to occult Auvergne, there is this continuity of experiences, whether it's like the witches or the sort of vampiric beings or the werewolves, or there's a mystical, there's something in terms of this, perhaps in terms of the psychogeography of it. There's something that is clearly happening, and that I am enjoying studying.
Well, listen, for people who want to know more about your work, what's the best way of them finding you?
They can go to at my current project on Auvergne, which includes some touristic information, but also a lot of original studies on, like, short studies on folklore and things like that, and esotericism in good measure. That's visitauvergne.org. It's VISIT AUVERGNE.org. And hopefully I spelled it correctly this time, because I forgot. Yeah, I forgot this. No, yeah, it's just, and then there's also obviously the Thinker's Garden, which is the blog that I've been running since 2014, and always the idea is just to sort of investigate, to speak to just cool people. There's just cool people doing cool things, and just to sort of share the information, and to kind of take a step outside of as I always say, the working day world, and to provide people with an opportunity to kind of read something that they never even thought existed, or was even possible. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. That's sort of my general approach to everything. I want to share these strange stories, these weird stories, these fascinating stories, these soul-wrenching stories, to people who are willing to listen.
Well, fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing them with us today. Really, some really interesting stuff there. I'm fascinated by the healers. I have to find out more about that. Well, it's been wonderful to have you on the Spirit Box. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to come back. And and great speaking with you, as always.
Fantastic. My pleasure. Thank you, Andrew. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you want to find out more about the region, then check out the links below and the links to Andrew's project, and you'll get everything that we've discussed in the show today. Right, that's it from me. I'm Dara Mason. You've been listening to The Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon.